Okay, so we are going to start with this case. This is an 80 gram prostate in a patient who has bothersome urinary symptoms. And here we have prostate, sphincter edge, and relatively big gland. Let's see if I can go in without having to do a lot of pressure. There you go. The bladder looks reasonably normal. Okay, so we're going to use the Moses laser with settings of 2 joules and 50 hertz. Good. The fiber coming in. Here you can see the edge of the sphincter, so I'm going to mark a little bit inside. Can you take the... Me quita la luz verde, Vane, por favor. I don't like the guiding green light. See if we can take it out. There's some bleeding due to inflammation and... Vale? Okay. So you see when we incise the mucosa at the beginning, there's some bleeding, but I don't get too stressed about it. Just continue demarcating the white line. Here we are again demarcating the white line. We shouldn't get very scared with this mucosal bleeding. Of course, you could use lower settings at the beginning if you wanted. But I usually can live with a little bit of mucosal bleeding the initial moments, and then once the white line is demarcated, the rest is a piece of cake. So here I'm going to cut near the verumontanum, and I'm going to try to find the proper plane this side. Here we are. This is the plane between prostate and adenoma, where you can do it mechanically or you can do it using some energy. Here I'm going to do the same, so I'm going to come down here, but initially I prefer to cut these fibers to allow the scope to move a little bit laterally without damaging the sphincter. Also, you know, if you go to that region, you can progress a little bit in the posterior plane like this, and we stop here in the middle because there is a frenulum of the veru. So now I'm going to cut it to try to join both planes in the midline. You can see that, and you're going to see how Moses provides excellent dissection and excellent first pass hemostasis. You know, it's very striking to see how when you do your dissection, the tissues are getting white. You see, because there is further reach of the energy that will ensure a very nice first pass coagulation. So here we are, I'm keeping the fiber at 6 o'clock. I don't like to move the fiber constantly. I'd rather keep it fixed. So either 6 o'clock or 12 o'clock. Here, for example, I just changed the fiber position, and now I'm going to work with the fiber at 12 o'clock. Here, of course, you have to work carefully to keep the fiber close to the adenoma. You see, like that. Try to let the energy open or cut the fibers that are keeping the surgical capsule and the adenoma together without deepening too much in the capsule. Also, you have to be always vigilant about anatomical information, the feedback you get from the image, because you want to try to understand the anatomy. Not all prostates have a good plane. Not always the plane is ideal. You know, sometimes it's a little bit inflammatory. So it is nice to move the scope from side to side, following this line of dissection. right until some of the posterior aspect has been detached. Let's do some hemostasis. Individual vessels that we might have overlooked. Near the mucosa usually. Near the mucosa. Okay, now I'm going to put the fiber 12 o'clock, and this is the sphincter, as you can see. And I'm going to try to detach the apex from the sphincter. You see that the prostate is higher up than the sphincter, so we need to get in there, you see, and try to detach the sphincter. So when we try to get above the adenoma and dissect it off the sphincter like that, we have some access, we have some possibility of getting here without stretching the sphincter too much and without damaging its mucosa. So here I'm doing the posterior aspect of the apical tissue here. It looks like, clearly looks like adenoma, so let's see if we can detach this, because that will give mobility to the apex. Before we go more anterior, you see I try to connect the lateral plane here that we are developing with the posterior plane that we had already developed. Okay, and now here I'm going to take my attention to the apex here. You see this is 12 o'clock. Here I'm going to do a horizontal incision, also to detach the sphincter above from the apex enough so that I have access again, and then I can go, you see, inside and up until I get towards 12 o'clock here. Usually the 12 o'clock fibers are parallel to the fiber at the beginning, but when we develop this space anteriorly here, the scope tip is starting to push. Just by being there, it's starting to push the adenoma downwards, you see. So we get better anterior access, and also this push is going to verticalize these fibers at here, you see. They're becoming a little bit more vertical and then more easy to cut. This is where we marked the 12 o'clock limit of the operation at the beginning. Here we can take the opportunity and cut almost towards the other side a little bit to facilitate the work from the other side. There we are. So now let's get to see the sphincter here. This is sphincter again. This is apical tissue, and what I want is to fire in the interface here where there is contact of the sphincter with the apex. You see, I don't mind making a little bit of a cut on the prostatic or on the surface of the adenoma, because this is just detaching the adenoma from the apex, and now when I go inside here, you see, we will make sure that we remove the whole adenoma, so there's no remaining BPH tissue. Just that this little incision that I do there gives me access. Here now I'm going to try to dissect the posterior tissue, posterior apex. Let's see if we can get. That looks adenomatous. This is a nodule. We have to study the tissue characteristics and try to read the anatomy. Here maybe it looks funny, no? There. Let's see if we can connect this incision with the one we had posteriorly. I'm going to progress a little bit further here and try to bring it down, try to connect with the previous line of dissection. Here, you see this was the posterior line, and this is now the lateral line in the posterior aspect. Again, this is coming here, this is the posterior line we marked at the beginning. Okay, so now we pay attention to the apical bit here. Again, you see that I'm trying to go under the sphincter and try to separate it from the apex. Again, I don't mind doing a small incision on the tissue of the adenoma, because then when we go to look for the good plane here, you know, that tissue will be removed anyway. But we will have better access anteriorly. You know, there's 12 o'clock tissue here, white. The fact that it's white lets me know that I can cut there confidently that the sphincter will not be damaged, because this is why I call it the white line, because as long as you are in the white line, here there is some adenomatous tissue, apparently, an apical nodule. Let's see if I can take it. Sometimes with these small spaces at the beginning, there's a lot of debris coming out of the prostate due to the energetic effect of the laser. Some of the tissue is vaporized, and then of course we see the debris, milky secretions coming out of the prostate, and when the space is too small, it's difficult for the exit orifices in the endoscope to irrigate properly. That's why we see a little bit more blurred. This is only momentarily, you know, and here, coming up, we're trying to connect with the other side. And when we do that, we are finalizing the early apical release, no? Which is what we were trying to attempt. So here, that's a good plane apparently. I don't know if that's a little bit of adenomatous tissue here also. As long as we are in the white area, I don't mind probing, you know, the tissue, checking. I'm trying to go a little bit deeper in the capsule to see if there's a even better plane. Sometimes coming from one side to the other is also a good idea, because maybe you might find a better plane, you know, that you can take towards the other side. More or less we have connected here, and just being a little bit anal, if you may say, about being aggressive and taking it all out. So here maybe I didn't take the proper route, or at least I'm trying to check if this is BPH tissue and that is capsule. It looks like capsule, so it looks good. And then of course we will have to work a little bit to make the lines connect again. You see here we are coming from below. We're coming from below. This is a lateral dissection we started here in the posterior aspect, so I have to come all the way up, and try to see if we can take this line and connect it with the other side. Sometimes the anterior plane needs a little bit of work. You need to go back and forth like this to establish a nice anterior line, you see, and then of course you want to take it towards the other side. So a little bit of work is needed sometimes to establish a good connection between the different sides of the prostate. This was anterior. Here we have to see, and we are now starting to see how wonderful Moses is for this operation, because it does provide hemostasis as you go, pay as you go, like Devanjo says, or you know, first pass hemostasis. That means that when you pass and you dissect your line of dissection like this, the hemostasis is quite efficient, quite good, and you don't have to worry too much about hemostasis anymore, just dissection. You see, I'm just following the plane around the prostate, following the plane, coming down here, coming down here. And this is the beauty of pulse modulation. I think it opens new avenues for improvement and development, and I think for the popularization of HoLEP. I think these lasers are much more attractive in the sense that probably holmium is my favorite, because holmium has a very high peak power. You know, what this means is that, you know, if you're going to use, for example, 1 watt, and that means 1 joule for 1 second. There are different ways to get 1 watt of power output. You know, you can do the first millisecond, you can emit all the energy, and then the rest of the seconds there would be no energy output. This would mean that all the joule is concentrated in a millisecond. You know, and that would give you a very high peak power. It means that the burst of energy is incredibly powerful, and it's only 1 watt. If you compare that to emitting the joule constantly over 1 second, you know, that would give you very low peak power, and the effect would be very different. And the advantage of HoLEP is that with very high peak powers, it produces a little explosion in the tip of the fiber, and then of course the second pulse is going to travel through this little bubble or little cavitation bubble that is produced and will reach a little bit further. But what I'm trying to say is that other lasers like thulium lasers and thulium fiber lasers, they have very low peak power, so they don't get this blast effect, this pressure wave, this that is going to open. You see, what you do is you put the energy, you spray the energy in the interface between adenoma and capsule, and then this explosion is going to break the links, you know, to break the attachments. It's going to try to find the path of least resistance, which is usually the virtual plane between adenoma and capsule. So when you do this procedure with thulium or thulium fiber lasers, you have to decide what you have. Basically, it's a very good cutting tool, and then you have to decide where the plane is. Here, the laser is developing it for you. So that's the main advantage. That's why I love, and that's why I choose HoLEP holmium as my tool. And of course, with this enhanced holmium, you know, this MOSES system, you can get an excellent first pass coagulation, which means that you can concentrate in your dissection and you don't worry too much about the hemostasis. You know, just occasionally you're going to see a pumper, an artery pumping blood. Maybe you have to stop for a moment to coagulate it, but in general, you see when you work, you see that you get excellent hemostasis, and that allows us to cut down the surgical times enormously. So we can do this relatively bulky prostates. This was estimated to be 80, but it looks to me a little bit bigger maybe. Let's see, if it was 80, it would be bulky enough, I think. And probably we're going to need, I don't know, 20-25 minutes to finish this case. So here you have seen that I opened the bladder neck, and now I have to do the posterior dissection. And here it is even more important to keep the fiber close to the adenoma. We want the energy to disrupt the plane, to open the plane, but we don't want the energy to go deep into the capsule. That's why I keep it all the way up, very up. Not against the capsule, but against the adenoma. And for example, when I'm going in this direction and then I correct, I have to go up, further up. You see, because that will dissect the plane carefully without penetrating too much in it. And then I go up again, you see. This keeps me more or less in the plane. If the posterior aspect is difficult and you start seeing changes in the quality of the plane, that means that you're going a little bit deep maybe, then it's a good idea to go and look for the lateral plane. Here it was, here it is. So we're going to try to develop this corner here and see the plane from the lateral aspect. Here you see we were reaching almost the bladder neck, not yet. It's probably safer to approach the posterior aspect from the lateral side, like that, you see. So you come here and then you take it towards the posterior aspect, and it keeps you in the right plane. Of course, if you see nodules, if you see round pieces of tissue that looks like BPH, like that, you try to take them out. There's always capsule beneath them, you know, but it can be very, very, very thin. So you have to be careful. As you know, I like to work symmetrically, so I went to the other side to do the same. You know, to progress in a symmetric way, a little bit in one side, a little bit in the other side. So our approach to the bladder neck is quite symmetrical. Here we're coming. Look at this energy that dissects the plane beautifully. You see, it's choosing the way for me. It's telling me where to go. Of course, I don't want this energy to go very deep, so I keep close to the ceiling of the operation, close to the adenoma in the upper part. Here we saw a nodule, so I'm going to try to spray it out. You see, just let the laser blow on the tissue a little bit, very careful, keep a distance that allows me to get this effect. Try to go under it, you see, but getting very close so I can respect the capsule below. So here we are again, we go from side to side, we come around to this region. Here is the bladder neck. Let's get closer to the bladder neck. Let's see if we can get some mobility and some detachment here. Again, trying to fire close to the adenoma, just cutting the superficial fibers that we want to release, but not getting too deep. Here would be the bladder neck. Okay, we had it already liberated. Check for the urethral orifice. I think it's going to be around somewhere. This is it. So you see now we have this lateral access to the posterior part. It's almost done on this side. Let's see the other side. Here I'm coming, trying to see what is holding, you see, the adenoma from flipping into the bladder. We don't want to flip too early, because if it is attached and you push, you might break this posterior plane and get under the trigon. So I only flip the adenoma when I have that. I can go and look at the bladder neck on both sides, like I did on the other side. I'm doing now here. You see, here we are reaching the bladder neck very nicely, because we want to have a very small hinge. You know, the attachment at 6 o'clock should be very small and not too wide, not too long, you know what I mean? So when I push the adenoma inside the bladder, it's not too big, not too attached. So we have to improve a little bit our work here, going from the lateral to the posterior. There we are. That's reaching to the trigon. Here there's more need for hemostasis than usual. That is mucosal bleeding. Mucosal bleeding. I bet that the UO is a little bit far there, so we are okay. Once you see the UO in one side, you can tell more or less where is the other one, and you can see that here we could still continue detaching. We have already almost already finished. Did you say that? Is that correct? I'm not sure. There we are. So now I think we are in a position to try to flip the adenoma. So what I'm going to do is I go to one side, I lift the adenoma to see if I can lift it and then push inside the bladder. It went in very nicely, so no big deal, no big problems. This is now some mucosal bleeding that we saw before. And this is the last attachment. You see here, you can cut in a smiling fashion like that. You detach the base of the middle lobe. It's a bleeder from the mucosa. Let's try to stop it. You see, this explosive nature of the holmium sometimes makes, that's a UO, sometimes makes the edge of the mucosa to bleed a little bit. And then if you want to coagulate the mucosa, you have to choose lower power settings, I think, because otherwise it will bleed more and more as you try to coagulate it. So make sure before you morcellate that you try to coagulate the mucosal bleeders, because those are the ones that are going to bother you more when you're morcellating. Maybe there is a small internal bleeding in the fossa, and what is going to happen is that it will form a clot inside the fossa, but that will not. So I'm going to lower the settings. This is the second pedal. I use 1 joule and 40 hertz to coagulate the mucosa like that, you see. Here I'm trying to get to the edge, because we have been dissecting it with this explosive effect of the holmium. So particularly in the mucosa it can produce a little bit of bleeding from the edges. Let's go up and check. Wonderful, wonderful tool, because you can work very, very confidently and you don't worry about the bleeding. This is especially useful, and where it really shines, this Moses later, is when you have to do a very large gland. I'm going to check here. This is the posterior aspect. You see how thin the capsule can be there. But we were radical. We took all the adenoma out. We take the catheter out the next morning, irrespective of how this looks. You see, it looks very flimsy, but we don't keep the catheter longer. So this is now 7:30 p.m. in Madrid, and the catheter will be removed tomorrow morning. With this quality of hemostasis, we will be extremely happy to take the catheter out, and we're almost certain that the patient will be able to void. Okay, let's go to morcellation. Now we have the piece in the bladder. This is a rough area near the ostium, I think. Not too near. We'll coagulate this so that I don't have nuisance bleeding during enucleation. Look at this. This is the beautiful preservation of the sphincter's mucosa. You see the mucosa goes all the way down here. We have preserved the mucosa where we want it. Maybe here there was a small nick. But a small nick is much better than classic deepithelization of the sphincter that took place all around except at 12 o'clock. So now I'm going to change the instruments. And I will use the light. There you go. Perfecto. My nurse Vanessa is helping me today with her large experience. And now we're going to raise the waters a little bit, and we're going to start the morcellation. Basically what I do is I am here, bladder neck, I go a little bit up, and I put the morcellator blade inside, because if you go too close to the tip of a endoscope, because it's logical, you might be afraid to think, if I put the blade too far, I might get the bladder. So you have to find a nice positioning, like here. Typically I say that you have to see the wolf, if you can, because then you have the ideal situation. You can see the adenoma on top, you can see the blade, you can see the two black triangles on the sides, and morcellation takes place in a static fashion. You know, I'm not moving, I'm keeping in a safe position, and my only concern is to see if morcellation is efficient or not. If it's not efficient, you know, when you see the mouth open of the blades, then you are sucking a lot of water out. When the tissue is not letting you see the mouth, then morcellation is being good, and you will take out a lot of tissue and very little water. So I don't use a second irrigation inflow, you know. I think that makes the procedure more cumbersome, more complicated, you know, 2 baths, 2 sets, 2 giving sets, but I'm very cautious, in the sense that once in a while I palpate the bladder to check that it is full. And of course I keep the balance in my mind. If it's good morcellation like this, I know that the inflow is going to be balanced with the outflow. and the bladder will keep reasonable distended. If I can see the mouth of the morcellator long enough, like now, you see here I stop and I go back to try to re-establish the engagement without moving too much. You can see that the hemostasis was amazingly good. I didn't spend too much time doing complementary hemostasis because the hemostasis is happening as you go, and that saves a lot of time. Also tonight I will go out for dinner and I will drink wine, knowing that I won't be called by the nurses because the patient is bleeding, as it used to happen before when we did PORP and of course open simple prostatectomy. It's really a joyful operation that everybody should learn. There are many advantages now if you want to learn. First, you have a lot of videos like this to learn the anatomy, to learn the concepts, to learn the steps of the operations. I think Luminis has started a educational program where you can see other techniques and other prominent surgeons performing surgery. Of course, there are much better instruments in the sense that morcellation, for example, now is so much faster than before. So instead of taking 40 minutes, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, it will take 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So this has shortened the procedure significantly. Better lasers, better morcellators, and I think a better technique, which is the En Bloc technique with early apical release and preservation of the mucosa of the sphincter, because that also improves the outcome, especially the possibility of having early stress incontinence is almost disappearing in these patients, and it's very, very low rate. And here we are witnessing a beach ball probably. Let's see how we deal with that. Here I'm continuing with the morcellation of the tissue. Maybe I need to let the bladder feel a little bit, but I can try to bring the piece. There's some bleeding, some oozing in the fossa, so I will try to continue in the bladder. Let's see if we can chew the tissue here. No, that's a beach ball. Vale, le da el botón, por favor. Here I'm continuing with the morcellation, yes. The thing is, even when you're in a safe position, if the bladder deflates, the bladder wall can get dangerously close to you, because if it's collapsing, it will get closer and closer to the morcellator blade, so you have to be careful. That's the beach ball. Let's see. There are little instances, not so often you find beach balls that the piranha system cannot chew, But let's see, maybe this is one of them. It can happen in real life. So here we are, trying to chew My advice is, if you can do a safe trial, a safe attempt, it's nice to chew them, if you can. Just check that the bladder doesn't empty too much. See, it's getting empty. It's not so large, but when you go in with your resectoscope to try to take it out, it looks much bigger than what you see here. Let's feel the bladder, be patient. You see when there's bad engagement, and this is difficult to morcellate because it's tough as leather, it's very, very tough tissue. So maybe I will have to go and use the resectoscope to take it out. The bladder is completely empty. Give me the resectoscope. And we will finish. As you can see, we have excellent hemostasis and excellent visibility, and it's a true joy to work with the new holmiums. No conecta, no se cierra bien. Sí, glicina, por favor, venga, siempre.
¿Ponemos la glicina por fin?
Venga.
La tienes aquí.
Here I am with my monopolar resectoscope. You see now the piece looks much bigger than it was before. So I'm switching to glycine, and I'll try to see what I can do with this piece. I have to make it smaller. Funciona el... It's very hard, very hard tissue indeed. Resecting these loose pieces inside the bladder is quite tricky, and if I make it small enough, I will try to see if it will fit in the urethra, and we will take it out, or we'll be able to take it out here. Also, I can try to bring it to the fossa, so it is a little bit safer to. I'll catch it like this. Try to bring it in the fossa and see if we can. No, it went again into the bladder. Ah, that's the fossa. That's the fossa. So we have it in the fossa now. You see, the fossa is so big that for a moment I thought I was in the bladder. Sometimes we have no other possibility than to try to resect it, make it smaller so we can take it out. Me hace falta la jeringa, ¿vale? Sí, HeLEP, vale. Okay. We'll use an HeLEP instrument to remove the small pieces. So this is the real life thing there. Even with top morcellator, top laser, sometimes you have to go back to the old resectoscope. The Iglesias would be happy to know that this instrument is still being used. And let's see, at a certain moment I would try to grab the tissue like this and see if it comes out in one piece, but it didn't. So let's go and try again. My nurse is always ready to help me with some gel. Look at the sphincter, it looks wonderful. Here we're coming in again. This is the remaining piece. It's a long one, but let's see if we grab it from here and I'll finish the cut. Maybe now it came out completely. It's in my hand. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. And now we will extract the fragments and put a catheter and go home. Venga, vamos a lavar con la... It's very hard. I'm going to wash with the HeLEP. Some of the pieces are coming out, relatively small and quite clear water. So I hope you enjoyed the video. It was a nice enucleation. a nice demonstration of how Moses can